Hello everyone, welcome back, or welcome. I'm Kris. This is, okay, let's see if I have the nerve to say it on camera, because I was saying it before. Is her name Nusaybah bint, how did I say that last part? Kiyab? Nusaybah bint Kiyab. Did I get it right? I feel like I nailed it. Probably didn't. But anyways, this is a video that somebody said, hey, give it a try. Forgot your name. Apologies. Before we get started, I probably will break this down in a little over 15-minute videos. There'll be 4 of them. Before we get started, though, hey, come on. There's a thanks button on the channel. You can donate. You don't have to. Subscribe if you'd like to, and give me a thumbs up, bare minimum. Okay, let's get into the video.
اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على عبدك ورسولك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Tonight we are going to be speaking about, inshallah ta'ala, a woman who truly is in a league of her own. And when I say she's in a league of her own, many times you find a genre of Sahaba of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then you talk about 3 or 4 of them that match the category. But with this woman, she actually is entirely in a league of her own, in that there is literally no other companion that is like her, radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And subhanAllah, it's interesting because we're coming off of, if you guys really want to make me feel good, who did we talk about last week? Hassan ibn Thabit. Okay, not a hard question. I just wanted to make sure that you're still with me, inshallah, from the very start. We just finished talking about Hassan ibn Thabit, radiyallahu anhu. And Hassan ibn Thabit is a man who is specifically known for not fighting, right? And is still praised by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? A man who refused to be in any battle and actually was unable to see the battlefield in any capacity whatsoever, yet still he is someone who is deeply praised by Allah and by the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And today we're going to be talking about a woman in Nusaybah bint Ka'ab radiyallahu ta'ala anha, who is only known for literally one thing, which is fighting, which is being in the battlefield. So subhanAllah, you find this interesting contrast amongst the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there is practically nothing narrated about this woman except for the battlefield that we're going to be talking about today, radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And fair warning, it's a bloody story. There's a lot of blood in this story. There's a lot of sacrifice in this story. And as I thought about, subhanAllah, what to title Nusaybah radiyallahu ta'ala anha with, she's literally the mother of all sacrifice. She reminds me, subhanAllah, of when you see some of those women from the areas of the ummah that are under oppression. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for them. And multiple of their children have been martyred, have been shuhada, and they still respond with rida, with pleasure with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this exemplary patience that you don't see anywhere else. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for those widows of the ummah and those women who often face some of these devastating circumstances, and their courage is on full display. This woman, radiyallahu ta'ala anha, reminds me of those women, or rather those women remind me of this particular woman, radiyallahu ta'ala anha. So let's introduce her a bit with her story, her background, inshallah ta'ala, first. So her name is Umara Nusaybah bint Ka'ab ibn Amr al-Ansariya. So she is Nusaybah bint Ka'ab ibn Amr al-Ansariya. And her name is also Nasiba.
I said, what did I say? I forgot how I said the last, but I got the first 2 right. I think I said Kiyab. Kaaba? I don't know. Kaaba? That's not the same. Yep, I was close. Didn't get the last one.
Nasiba. Both pronunciations are correct. So her name is recorded as both Nusaybah and Nasiba. So if anyone wants to name their daughter Nasiba instead of Nusaybah, it's fine, inshallah ta'ala, as both of them are narrated as Ibn al-Athir rahimahullah says, and they're both correct. So she is also someone from the tribe of Banu Najjar. Can anyone tell me who Banu Najjar is? At this point, hopefully some of you can remember as we get into the details of the story. They are the maternal relatives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Who can tell me some of the companions that belong to Banu Najjar? I'll give you a clue, the last one we covered. All right, Hassan ibn Thabit, the person who hosted the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, the mother of Anas ibn Malik. I'm just testing you guys, trying to wake you up. Who's the mother of Anas ibn Malik? Sulaym radiyallahu anha. So there are a few of the Ansar that belong to this tribe of Banu Najjar, and Banu Najjar was a sub-tribe of Khazraj, and they were the akhwal, they were the maternal relatives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and so they had a greater attachment or a greater affection to him by the standards that existed at the time. Now, we don't have any information about her parents. The assumption is that her parents passed away before Islam even came to Al-Madinah. But what we do know is that as far as she is concerned, both her and her husbands, her previous husband, as well as the husband that she would marry afterwards, all accepted Islam, and her brothers also accepted Islam. So her brothers are Abdullah ibn Ka'b and Abdurrahman ibn Ka'b radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma. Abdullah ibn Ka'b and Abdurrahman ibn Ka'b were both early companions of the Prophet ﷺ from Medina, meaning they were from the first of the Ansar to accept Islam. They took bay'ah with the Prophet ﷺ. They attended every battle with the Prophet ﷺ. And her brother Abdurrahman in particular is known as one of al-Bakka'in, one of those who were crying. I don't expect you all to remember too much about this, but you remember in the story of Ka'b ibn Malik radiyallahu anhu, there were a group of companions who could not go out in Tabuk because they didn't have the means. And so they cried, they wept, because they wished to be with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So one of those people that was noted as being amongst those that were crying, those that sincerely wished they could be with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala athbata lahum al-ajr. Allah Azza wa Jal recorded their good deed in the Quran, as if they were there in Tabuk with the Prophet ﷺ, because they were sincere in wishing they could be with the Prophet ﷺ, is her brother Abdurrahman, who was grieving when he found himself unable to go out with the Prophet ﷺ in the battle of Tabuk. So her brothers have this quality as well of rushing to the side of the Prophet ﷺ and wanting to be there for the Prophet ﷺ. Now she has two husbands that are recorded, and it's important to note because it's actually very interesting. Her first husband is Zayd ibn Asim. Zayd ibn Asim radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And it appears, and Allah knows best, that they were married before Islam and divorced before Islam. Okay? However, he's also a companion. All right? Her second husband is Ghaziyya ibn Amr. Ghaziyya ibn Amr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So both her previous husband as well as the husband after, Zayd as well as Ghaziyya, Zayd ibn Asim and Ghaziyya ibn Amr, are both companions of the Prophet ﷺ. So when Islam eventually came to Al-Madinah, they both are considered from the early companions of the Prophet ﷺ from Al-Madinah. From her first husband, Zayd ibn Asim, she has her two famous children, her two famous sons. The first one is Habib ibn Zayd. The second one is Abdullah ibn Zayd. So it is, again, you have Nusaybah or Nusaybah bint Ka'b, her first husband Zayd ibn Asim, and she has her two famous sons from them, who we're going to learn about as well in the story, bidnillahi ta'ala, Habib ibn Zayd and Abdullah ibn Zayd. And then from her second husband, Ghaziyya, she has a boy that's named Tamim and a girl that is named Khawla, that we don't know much about, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, that are recorded, their names are there, but we don't know much about them at all. Her two sons are very famous. We'll see why they're very famous, but her two sons, Habib ibn Zayd and Abdullah ibn Zayd, are very famous. SubhanAllah, all of them, her previous husband and her current husband at the time that Islam came, all of her children are amongst those who embraced Islam immediately when they heard about it in Medina. She was amongst those who heard the message from Mus'ab ibn Umayr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So if you put yourself in her shoes, she is one of those who attended the first gathering of Mus'ab ibn Umayr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu when he comes to Yathrib at the time. in that gathering by As'ad ibn Zurara, and he starts to talk to the people about Islam, about this new message from Mecca. However, you start to see some of her famous character from the very start, which is that she did not wait for the Prophet ﷺ to come to Medina. She instead herself went to Bay'atul Aqaba al-Thani, the second pledge with the Prophet ﷺ. So the first pledge was in Mecca with the 6 men privately with the Prophet ﷺ, and then the second one is the 72 or 73 companions that came to Mecca the next year in Hajj after embracing Islam with Mus'ab ibn Umair, and they privately took the bay'ah with the Prophet ﷺ. They were 70 men, and 2 women or 3. So we know there are 70 men that came from Medina to Mecca in this daunting journey with Mus'ab radiallahu anhu and met the Prophet ﷺ privately to take the bay'ah with him. And obviously it's understood that when they take the bay'ah on behalf of their families as well. But Nusaybah was one of those who was insistent that she herself go to the Prophet ﷺ and she take the pledge with the Prophet ﷺ. And so she narrates about this time, and it's narrated first from one of the male companions. In fact, from Ka'b ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Ka'b ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu says, اجتمعنا بالشعب ونحن 70 رجلا ومعنا امرأتان. That we met the Prophet ﷺ privately in secrecy in Mecca, and we were 70 men, and we had with us 2 women. And he says, Nusaybah bint Ka'b, Umara, and another woman, Asma bint Amr, who was known as Manir. So Nusaybah bint Ka'b, Umara, and Asma bint Amr, Manir. And in some narrations, we also have the mother of Anas radiallahu anhu, Suleiman radiallahu anha. So 2 or 3 women that actually went on that journey, which was a very daring journey, to take the pledge with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam took the pledge with the 70 men, they lined up and they all shook the hand of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they took the pledge with him. And then she now narrates, she says that Zawji Ghaziyya, my husband Ghaziyya, said to me, Ya Rasulullah, Hatani imra'atan hadarata, that these are 2 women that have come to take the bay'ah with you as well. And the Prophet ﷺ said, then let it be. And he took it verbally and he said, La usafih an-nisa, I do not shake hands with women. So this was the famous narration of the Prophet ﷺ saying, La usafih an-nisa, I do not shake hands with women, was in fact in Bay'atul Aqaba al-Thaniya, was in the second bay'ah with the 70 men and these 2 women that had come from Al-Madinah to embrace Islam with the Prophet ﷺ. But he took the bay'ah with them still, with the same verbal allegiance alayhi salatu wassalam that he took.
Why not shake hands with women? Is it because that wasn't his wife, so he did not want to touch a woman that wasn't his wife because that's disrespectful? That would make sense. That's the only thing I can think of. Because I don't think I know that it's not because women are less than. I've heard too much about him to know that that's not what he thinks. So it must be just a respect factor of, I will only touch, my wife. It's disrespectful to touch you because you're married, and that man may look at it like you're touching my wife, even if it's just a handshake.
From the 70 men. This is the earliest recollection that we have of her. We don't have much about her before Islam. In fact, we have nothing about her before Islam. And we don't have much about her after this except for the battles that she's going to take part in. But I just want you to appreciate for a moment the mindset that she goes out there herself to take this bay'ah with the Prophet ﷺ, and she wants to experience this as well. She also mentions in one narration that she brought her young children. So she's already gearing her children for this idea of sacrifice on the part of the Messenger ﷺ. So her 2 children, Habib and Abdullah at the time, Habib ibn Zayd and Abdullah ibn Zayd, were still young from her previous marriage, and she took them to take the bay'ah with the Prophet ﷺ. Now when the Battle of Badr comes around, She was not present at the Battle of Badr because the Battle of Badr, of course, took part away from Al-Madinah, right? And nor were her children present because her children were too young. However, both her previous husband and her current husband were amongst the Badriyun, as well as her brothers. Okay? So her family is already out there in the Battle of Badr, and they're considered from the best of the companions. And as we said, the only reason why her own children are not there, Habib ibn Zayd and Abdullah ibn Zayd, is because they were still considered too young to fight in the Battle of Badr. Then comes the Battle of Uhud. Now, the whole biography of Nusaybah bint Ka'b is pretty much summarized usually in the Battle of Uhud. But we're going to go beyond that because it's very interesting. She participates in Uhud, as we're going to see. But then after Uhud, she also participates in the Battle of Khandaq. She also goes to Hudaybiyah. She also participates in Hunayn. And then she participates in the Battle of Yamama. And then she participates in the Battle of Yarmouk. So basically, Uhud opened the door for this woman to where she wasn't going to miss the battlefield after that moment with the Prophet ﷺ. So while we usually think of Umara, Nusaybah bint Ka'b radiallahu anha, for this famous role that she plays in the Battle of Uhud, this was just the beginning for her radiallahu ta'ala anha. And you get this look through her eyes of the beginning of the battle, because she was so famously tied to Uhud. You can't read the books of Seerah without seeing someone walking up to her in Medina and asking her about the day of Uhud. What was the day of Uhud like? So she narrates some of what happened with her herself, which is very precious, when she can give you a first-hand account of Uhud herself, and others narrate what happened with her as well, and she narrates what happened to some of the companions on the day of Uhud as well. So she lived long enough to narrate the story of Uhud through her own experience, through her own eyes. And subhanAllah, it's very interesting because when I was reading through some of the narrations from Umara radiallahu ta'ala anha about the day of Uhud, she would say, I can see, inni ara, I can see this person coming forth. I can see, ka'anni ashhad, as if I'm looking at it right now. So it's like every single time she told you the story of Uhud, when you sat with her, she was narrating it and she was recalling every incident, and she was deeply moved by those moments because it was clearly the most defining moment in her life, radiallahu ta'ala anha. A day when most people ran away from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she was going to be one of those women who ran towards the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the few that ran towards the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So she describes the way the Battle of Uhud starts to take place. She describes the moment that 300 of the hypocrites abandoned the Prophet ﷺ before the battle even started. So the Prophet ﷺ is left already with 700 out of 1,000 because 300 men turned away from the battlefield right before it even started on the day of Uhud, on the premise that Abdullah ibn Ubay bin Salul said, he's not taking my advice. We should have fought inside Medina. Uhud is considered on the outskirts of Medina. So she witnesses the abandonment of the Prophet ﷺ.
I'm going to go back a little bit, but probably one more. And we'll call it here. And we'll come back and we'll just pick up from here. So that's part one. I don't know if I've heard of her. And I'm sure somebody will point out, well, she was the woman who, and I'll be like, oh, okay. I don't know the names of this. I don't know the sons. But it'll be one of those things where somebody's like, oh, yeah, the son did this and the other son did that. And I'll be like, oh, okay, I remember that. Maybe. I don't know. All right, well, I'm going to end this one here. We'll be back with part two. Not after I cough, because we're back right now after the cough, so. But until part two, which is tomorrow for you. Did my phone chime or did I just hear a noise for no reason? Anyways, so until next time, or tomorrow, have a good day, have a good night.